For the most part, I had a really good relationship with the baseball staff there and the track staff there, but there were some other teams that I kind of, butted some heads with in some of those thought processes. And ultimately it all kind of boiled back down to like, what do you value? Are we putting the athlete first, or are we, putting our own ego and like what we think is going to work? Do you want to be the reason why your athlete succeeds, or do you want the athlete to be the reason why they succeed? I think if you have the servant mindset, then you're going to come at it like, hey, I just provided an opportunity. I try to, keep that mindset here of like, if an athlete ever really thanks me big time, I'm like, hey, like, you're welcome, but understand, like, you did the hard part.
Yeah.
Like, I provided the easy part. You did the hard part.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the MTB Performance Project. We've got Ben Loftis on today. Ben, how are you, brother?
I'm doing really good, Mickey. How are you?
Excellent. Appreciate you taking the time to be here. I know you're kind of in a transitional part of the year with your athletes going back to school, and before all your pro athletes come back from their off season. So how are things going?
Really good. We had a great summer. I had an influx of college athletes that kind of spread us a little thin, but in a really good way. And we're definitely growing well, and our athletes are making a ton of progress. We're getting to see a lot of kids grow in a lot of different ways. So
yeah, that's awesome. It's funny. Like, I think any gym owner or somebody who's kind of like a head coach / operator of their facility, like they always have like different periods of time where they feel like they're overstaffed or understaffed, but it's very rarely are we kind of in that sweet spot. It's often, you're running around like crazy, training a lot of athletes, or like you're at the point where like, all right, well, we need more athletes. So, and I know, we talk a lot, through our experience through Business for Unicorns, and, you and Emily and myself, like, so I privy to a lot of like the stuff that you're doing to kind of grow your business, and respect a lot of the stuff that you're doing out there in Arkansas. So, for those who don't know you and your company, Resolute Performance, tell us a little bit about it and kind of how you got started.
Yeah, for sure. So we're a high performance training facility, private sector. The bread and butter, the majority of what we do is athletic performance development for youth and high school athletes. We do have an ample amount of college athletes and a handful of pro athletes as well. But the majority of what we do is kind of in between the ages of 11 and 18. We have a lot of just kind of based off of our population, we do have a lot of overhead athletes. We have a little bit of everybody. I mean, we have a wrestler, we have dancers, we have some odds and ends, but we have a lot of baseball, softball, handful of volleyball. We do have a good amount of women's basketball. But yeah, we kind of get a little bit of everything. We try to adhere to kind of a little bit more of a long-term athletic development model. So we track a lot of metrics over a long period of time to make sure that our athletes are understanding kind of the peaks and valleys of training and understanding the process of athletic development. And we're a lot more interested in the end game than the immediate success. I tell a lot of people, we're the crock pot, we're not the microwave.
Love that.
So yeah, we're in Northwest Arkansas, so kind of like the Fayetteville region. That's kind of the overview.
Yeah, I mean, I know you were a football player, right?
Yep.
How'd you get into working with so many overhead throwing athletes? Because we'll kind of touch about your career in terms of like your strength and conditioning career, like as a pro coach. But how'd you get involved in the baseball side, coming from a football background?
Yeah, for sure. I was a terrible baseball player in high school. I was very bad. I from a town of like 1,000 people, and it was kind of one of those everybody plays everything or else we don't have a team. So I had a lot more success in football, basketball, and track, but I played like Legion baseball in the summer. And yeah, it was kind of like I was a lot more of like a fire, ready, aim athlete, a little bit more like anxious and kind of like the go of some of those other field sports. Baseball just kind of felt a little too slow to me, and I had a hard time like relaxing in the box, things like that. But I got to college and I played defense, played safety, and I had a lot of stingers in college and neck issues, and that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of I started seeing a chiropractor regularly, but then that wasn't like getting things to stick.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some other exposure. Being from Nebraska, postural restoration is kind of big in the physical therapy world there,
Yep.
and had some exposure to that through a physical therapist that I work with in college. And then I did an internship at a facility in Omaha that was very PRI heavy, and that
Got it.
was like the thing that got me to get things to stick and to not have nerve sensation and pain. I mean, it would still come and go, but it was like kind of a notable shift there. And
Hmm.
that rabbit hole kind of got me interested in the asymmetries of the body.
Yep.
Um, then, I did an internship at Iowa State with football after I graduated. I went to Northwestern College, an NAI
Okay.
in Iowa, and then went to Iowa State for an internship. And at the end of that internship, I wasn't sold on football necessarily, but was kind of like, maybe I do something else for another year, and then if I come back to football, I do. If I don't, I don't. And I ended up taking a position at Arkansas, where I worked with baseball and men's track and field, and kind of that PRI mindset kind of shifted to baseball really well. And
Mm-hmm.
the guy who was the head at the time, Mike Struhall, he was starting to dabble in that stuff as well. And so that kind of led to, this is really interesting. I
Yeah.
liked playing football as a sport, but dissecting and processing how the human body moves and functions from a global standpoint for an asymmetrical sport, that really just kind of piqued my interest. And that's kind of how things started rolling.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember back when PRIs started to become popular. I did I forget the respiration, and then I've done the baseball course when that was
Mm-hmm.
still out, and it certainly created like a unique lens to look at a lot of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there's so much asymmetry in baseball alone as it is, but then you just look at how asymmetric the human body is, and that just the principles and frameworks they use just was very helpful in terms of how we are looking, assessing, and just you know uh, categorizing athletes in terms of how they move and what limitations they may or may not have. But yeah, it's interesting you say that. So,
Yeah.
um, and so you like, do you still utilize a lot of that stuff in your coaching now, and kind of learn through this stuff with the university and through PRI?
Yeah, for sure. It was one of those where I was kind of, implementing like a, you know, 50,000 foot lens at that point.
Yeah,
And once I got into pro baseball, yeah, as a staff, we did multiple courses over the years that I was there. And I definitely think, just like anything, you can get too far down a rabbit hole to where
yeah,
you lose the macro. If you specialize in the micro too much. Not that, I mean, it's incredibly valuable, especially from a
yeah.
practitioner standpoint, but um, you can definitely lose sight of the strength coach job, the
Hmm.
performance job, if you try to specialize in it too much. But yeah, we do use it pretty consistently. I mean, there's a lot of situations where, maybe it's overhead patterns that we're trying to clear up, but I've even been utilizing it a lot with some ACL return to play. We had a foot stress fracture situation recently that we started implementing some of those things too.
Yeah.
If you had athletes in a walking boot for a while, that will really start to mess things at the hips, and how the ribs relate to the hips there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a like a minimal effective dose thing, right? Because as you said, as strength coaches, like athletes come to us for a certain result, right? A certain level of training and capacity and stress and outputs and all those things. So it's like we have to be careful that as strength coaches, we're not totally going down that rabbit hole, because then we kind of lose sight of what our job really is.
Mhm.
Um, but if you understand a bit of the nuance and when to apply it and how to apply it at its minimal effective dose, I find it to be very effective. But I remember when you learn all these things, you want to try to apply it and figure it out. And then you find yourself like, all right, well, we're 30 minutes into a session and we've just done breathing exercises, and I'm starting to lose the attention of this high school kid. And it's like, we need to rein it back in. And so that quickly adjusted in my practice. So it's interesting. You talked earlier about, you're very much the long-term athletic development model, the crockpot analogy, and how you track improvements across your athletes over years. What are some of the other like first principles that you found that have kind of shaped your way of coaching and stuff that you apply in your day-to-day practice?
Yeah, I think one thing that we try to hang our hat on a lot is, there's a Leonardo da Vinci quote: "Simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication." Um, so trying to pinpoint like what we believe is going to be most effective and of most priority initially,
Hmm.
and not deviating from those principles, I think is really, really important. There's general qualities that every athlete is going to need in some capacity, whether it be movement quality and efficiency, general strength, some sense of conditioning, and
Hmm.
then speed and power outputs as appropriate as well. But trying not to get too fancy, and being brilliant at the basics. When I was in pro ball, we had the opportunity with the Padres. The Navy SEAL base is pretty friendly with allowing us access to their guys.
Hmm.
So there's a couple of fall instructional leagues where we would have maybe a guest SEAL veteran come in and share some principles about what they do and why they're the best in the world at what they do. And one of the things I'll never forget, one said, he's like, it's really cool in the movies when people rappel off the side of a building and then they kick out the glass and they're on a rope and they like shoot up everybody in the room. He's like, but it's way more effective and you're way more accurate if you kick in a door, your feet are on the ground, and you execute clean headshots. He's like, that is the basics, and we do the basics better than everybody. So we'll never
Hmm.
deviate from what we know how to do and what we rep day in and day out that we believe to be um, of priority. So try not to get cute, trying to be simple, and things will get more complex or sophisticated as you start to add time and training years and the robust like nature of load and volume over time. But yeah, just trying not to rush. We want our kids
Hmm.
to be able to move in all planes of motion as effectively as possible. We want them to be able to display sound levels of strength in proportion to their body size and where their training age is at. And we want them to be able to put a lot of force in the ground and be able to cover ground quickly. So those are kind of like the basic, like this is what we're starting with. We'll add in these capacities as we see fit, but those are kind of the non-negotiables of qualities that we're going to develop.
Yeah. And so through your integration process of new athletes into your system, what does the assessment process look like? What are some of the key metrics that you're kind of at least initially looking at
Mm-hmm.
and then tracking over a long period of time?
Yeah, on our movement assessments, on day one, the first thing you do is we put you on a table and we check range of motion at pretty much every joint, um, and we kind of assess to where we might be limited, and if those limitations are if they're changeable or if it's a little bit more of like, hey, these bony structures that are just going to be what they're going to be.
Hmm.
So we can kind of figure out where we can make improvements, whether that be at the ankle, the hip, thoracic spine, shoulder. Um, and once that assessment's complete, then we kind of go through like a slower onboarding process over the course of about 2 weeks, where they're
Hmm.
one-on-one with the coach, and we're going through some basic movement patterns that we're going to train people on: hinge, squat, push, pull, things like that. But we're taking notes of that movement assessment and how we're seeing it now executed under load. And that, so basically over the course of 2 weeks, we slowly build up to where like, okay, now we kind of have a little bit more of a profile built out and it's a plan. And also we like to do it that way because it allows for a lot more like intimate teaching and technical coaching.
Hmm.
And then in terms of our other metrics that we track, um, will track. Well, we don't do this on the first day, but we track acceleration speed. So like a 10-yard dash, we track a fly 10 at top speed.
Hmm.
We'll track broad jump weekly. We'll track vertical jump off of force plates. So when we test those, bi-weekly to weekly, and so you start to see the data points kind of track up over time of, initially kids are going to improve because if you do anything for the first time for 6 weeks, you're going to adapt. But then we'll start to see kind of some rhythms of maybe I was down this week, maybe I was up this week. But then that's where the conversation of long-term athletic development comes in of like, okay, you're not going to PR every time. There's a lot
Yeah.
of reasons why you probably are down, and that's okay. But let's understand, is it what's our sleep look like? What's our hydration, our nutrition? What does our workload look like? Hey, maybe you had a big tournament this last weekend. You're probably going to be a little slower, and that's okay. That's fine,
Hmm.
as long as we can understand what the load is and kind of how we're modifying and regulating that load over time.
Yeah. I love that. It's important to, there's a lot of ways people can, like create issues with technology and like the consistent tracking of it. I found the best way from a micro level, looking at it from like a day to day or week to week, is it's tracking trends, right? And
Mhm.
understanding, getting athletes to understand every time you sprint, every time you lift, every time you jump, those things, like it's not going to be, you're not going to PR every time, right? As you said earlier, like the first 6 to 8 weeks of a young athlete's like initial like training uh, experience, like they're probably going to see improvement across the board,
Mhm.
but that's going to start to flatline over time. And
Mhm.
then from a micro level, it's like, all right, well, it allows us to track other behavioral qualities, right? Like, are we, like you said, are we sleeping well, or do we have stress outside of the gym? Now it's more a measure of like readiness and just overall like preparedness. It's
Mhm.
like similar to like a readiness score from a Whoop or things like that. Like
Yeah.
objectively, those are great tools to utilize day to day because it allows us to adapt and adjust training programs on a day to day basis, especially with those higher output athletes. But as you mentioned, from a macro level, over time, if we can start to see these trends moving athletes in the right directions, not only are we proving to the athletes and what we're doing is valuable, but it's also like, all right, our programs are doing what we want them to do, right?
Yep.
Or if they're not, then we need to audit and adjust. And I think that's a great way to utilize technology. So um, cool. So you mentioned force plates, timing gates, things like that. That's kind of your go-to, other than like the obvious like broad jump, vertical jump, other things that you're utilizing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. We do have, especially our college athletes, have actually all jumped on the Whoop train.
Hmm.
So that has been a piece where they've created a Whoop group. We can
Yeah.
see our, and that was really great that it was kind of an organic thing. I do have one, but it's one of those, the cost side of things that we didn't want to make people feel like they had to. If they wanted to, they could, and that's been
Yeah.
a good source of auto regulation too. It's also been good to if you have the athlete who um, they feel like they aren't doing that great, but then they can kind of see the recovery score and be like, oh, actually,
Hmm.
I'm feeling okay. I can push today, or on the other end of that too, of like, I feel really good. Well, and then maybe they don't jump as high or run as fast, and they're like, well, let's look at your Whoop score. Oh, actually, you are 34% recovered. Maybe we need to adjust, and
Yeah.
understand why. It kind of lets them, the kind of the overachiever grinders, in quotes grinders, like it kind of gives them the ability to pull the reins back on them a little bit. And we do use, we use velocity based training too, at different times of the year, training blocks that make sense, as another piece of auto regulation to get them to maybe push a
Hmm.
little bit more than they thought they could, or give them some peace of mind and taking weight off the bar.
Yeah. It's often a good segue into sometimes conversations that need to be had, right? Because most athletes subjectively walk in and feel good enough to train most days,
Mm-hmm.
especially as they get older. Um, but those objective measures are really important as we work with athletes longer and train them for longer, and like they have a lot more to lose if they train when they're not ready to train, especially the stuff that we're giving them. It's always good to have that stuff to kind of lean into and say, look, I get it, you feel good, but objectively, like let's just pull back the reins a little bit today. So
Yep.
um, so you had mentioned one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and you've had the experience of working with athletes of all levels, and you've had your business for a while, so you're probably dealing with athletes at a higher training age that were once young kids who've never trained before, and now you're seeing them for maybe their second, third, fourth, fifth off season.
Mm-hmm.
How do you conceptualize the way you're training these athletes differently as they start to create a larger and more robust training age? um, Maybe they're competing a lot more, so they have a lot more to compete with from a sport volume and load management standpoint. um, how do you conceptualize how you're approaching those training programs with older athletes, like your higher level college or perhaps professional athletes versus your high school kids?
Yeah, I think it goes back to thinking about like the foundational pyramid of development. We want movement capacity, work capacity, and strength to kind of be the bedrock of what we do, in terms of general preparation, and then you start to ask yourself the question of like how strong is strong enough, for the demand of what they have.
Hmm.
Is an athlete who maybe weighs 200 pounds going to run that much faster if he's deadlifting, 605 instead of 585?
Hmm.
Probably not. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you also have to remember that they've done all the work to get as strong as they are. So the body remembers adaptation well, if an athlete is highly trained. So when you get those athletes back, it's, we kind of work from the bottom up of that pyramid, where we're going to develop the bedrock first, and then we're going to move to more of the, you know, closer to sport movements, higher speed, higher velocity movements. Um, and still being a step away from the game that they're playing. So addressing those things first, kind of like filling in big rocks, and then also because their playing volume over the course of the year is higher. That's where I see a lot of like movement deficiency issues start to
Hmm.
creep in, especially an asymmetrical sport like baseball, or even
Yeah.
you know um, even football players. We work with a tight end who he has a couple of moves that he likes to make every time he runs a route in order to create separation, and that's great because they work for him, and that gets him open. But if he's constantly jabbing with the right, going back to the left, and then going over the top with the right and spinning back to the ball, I mean that he does that how many times during a 7-on-7 or route running drill, and then game over the course of the season. Those things add up, especially if they have other injuries. So going back to throughout the process, are we constantly addressing movement capacity, and are
Hmm.
we giving them correct movement capacity to where we're not going to compromise them in other positions? I think is something that we really do try to prioritize. So kind of like filling in big rocks first. Of let's get back our main qualities that we need to have. Let's address them often enough. With training residuals of how long. I got to address strength at least once
Hmm.
a month. I've got to address speed weekly in some capacity. Making sure we're matching training residuals. But those are kind of the big rocks. But then I look at like the sand in between the big rocks is movement capacity. Are we staying healthy? Are we if we have previous injury, the body remembers trauma. The body remembers those things. So are we, doing things to give them the range of motion that they need in different areas to, mitigate that risk, and then also doing some things neurologically to help the body, not hold on to that trauma as much too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found that, it takes time to build that foundation with young athletes who have no context or experience doing it.
Yes.
With the older athletes, usually, they come back from a long season. First 4 to 6 weeks you're spending on GPP, and they can they their body remembers what it feels like to move. It's just a matter of like kind of getting them back into that routine where,
Mm-hmm.
again, retaining movement quality and just competency there, and some movement variability where, like, as you said, like with baseball, it's just they've got months and months of just the same movements over and over again. How do we reset all those things and then create a good foundation for them to like build upon that off season? So
Mm-hmm.
love it. So outside of, X's and O's of training, like what are some of the things that in your work with athletes are just some of like the common misconceptions that you're constantly going up against in your, your talks with athletes, your coaching of athletes? What are some things that, like, man, all the time I'm dealing with this, like, just I wish athletes understood this aspect of training that they just don't get.
Yeah, I think I would have to say just kind of like overall volume management, especially with our youth and high school athletes. I think even like I would have been like just out of college. I think there was a guy named Earl Thomas who had a book called The Grind, and he had a bunch of like training montage videos and public speaking things that he did that was just talking about like you have to put in the work. So what if you're sleeping 3 hours a night? So what if so what if don't make any excuses, it's a grind, you have to do more, if you're sleeping somebody else is working getting better, and that's just not true. The amount of times that's kind of the first thing that we have to debunk when we start with some new athletes is, I mean, it's pretty much all the time. um,
Hmm.
uh, so getting them to understand like there are some non-negotiables. We talk a lot about, sometimes I'll have kids that'll ask me like, well, what can I do for extra work to get better? And a lot of times when I hear that, when I go, what do you mean extra work?
Yeah.
There's just work. Like we're giving you what you need. I guess if you want extra work, you can make sure you're eating more and sleeping more, and you're staying hydrated, and you're managing, your overall workload. One of the things that we tell a lot of our kids at that age is, a good structural model for your overall workload for the week is 1 hour of physical activity per year you've been alive per week. So when we say like structured, organized physical activity, it's like you're showing up to something that's scheduled. There is a coach who is eliciting some sort of program to you, and you're executing based off of their verbal instruction for that time. So, any sort of practice, any sort of lesson, honestly, like what we do counts. We are a lot more general in nature than like a specific skill instruction, but it is still you're being coached. And we find that to be healthy for also like the mental side of burnout. Um, if there's a lot of kids that you'll see now that, they're, specializing, going around the country, and they're playing so much that by the time they get to like high school, they're like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do it anymore. So what we try to do is make sure that we're providing opportunities to regulate that over the course of time. And we also understand, there might be a situation where you've got a big tournament on the weekend. Maybe you're a 15-year-old kid, but with everything that you have going on, and then that weekend, maybe you're closer to that 20-hour mark for the week. It happens, but that means the next week we probably need to, back off a little bit.
Yeah.
And trying to give them things that aren't necessarily like hard checklists, but are more conceptual and qualitative that they can kind of like comprehend. Like, not that we have to sit down and write out your entire schedule, but you can quickly think through, I have practiced this many nights a week. They're this many hours. I come and train at Resolute 3 times. Okay. And then I have my lesson. Okay. That puts me at, 15 hours. I'm 15 years old. Okay. I'm good. Like, that's enough.
Yeah.
So there's no extra work. There's just work. If it's extra, then it's probably too much.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. I would agree that for sure a lot of kids, the grind and hustle mentality of today's sports atmosphere it's definitely a matter of like having to like pull kids back and pull them like the reins back on them. Although I don't know how you feel. Sometimes I don't know if I would rather that or the kid who just needs a ton of motivation and
Yeah.
is not doing enough work. It's like anything. It's just a matter of like what's the battle you want to face. But I would definitely agree in terms of educating them, right? Because if these kids are going to continue to play past high school, college, and maybe beyond that, like they really need to get to understand these things, because when it comes to managing all of these things, like I say it, like we just manage stress.
Yep.
Your body can't decipher stress in a weight room, in school, on a baseball field, on a football field. You broke up with a girlfriend, or you're having a fight with your best friend. Like, that's stress. Your body can't, like, it's all the same to the body. And so we as strength coaches, it's, and this is part of our assessment, is like, what's all the things you're doing? Let's talk it out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially if somebody's coming to us and is like, well, we have this overuse injury. I'm like, well, okay, let's talk through what's going on. And, you can really start to paint a picture as to what's going on. And oftentimes it's the old, addition by subtraction methodology, where it's like, all right, well, you're doing too much. You don't need to do more, right? Let's be a little bit more strategic with the things that we're giving you and doing here, and then also outside of the gym. And let's also not, as you mentioned, neglect the importance of sleep and nutrition and all of your recovery things that you're doing. So yeah, that's an example of one of the things, like, we only have so much time and bandwidth with our athletes when they're here. But if we can teach them and get them to understand the importance of what they do outside of the facility, that's just as important as what they're doing, if not maybe more important than what they're doing when they're with us.
Oh, for sure. And I really also, with kind of like the, kids that want to do more, when we talk to the kids about that bandwidth of like, hey, this many hours per week, what we don't include is if you want to go over to your buddy's house and play pool basketball, that doesn't count, because you chose, from the psychological side of things,
That's fun.
You chose to go and do this thing. And also, you guys are going to make up your own rules to make it fair.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a lot of like unstructured free play that's going to happen with that. And even in our athletic development sessions, a couple days a week, we, emphasize agility, and we don't really do a lot of like cone specific drills with that. Obviously, agility is more reactive in nature. So we have a couple of, close sided games that we'll go and play on. And we'll actually give the kids, we'll start the game and we'll play for a couple minutes, and then we'll stop the game and be like, hey, does this feel like it's fair? No, it's not fair. This kid's better than this kid. Blah blah blah. Okay, all right. So how would you guys make it fair? Well, he can only play with his left hand. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll do that. Okay,
I
how
love
else would
that.
you make it fair? Oh, we're going to move our goal to here. Okay, all right. Play for another minute or two. All right, is it fair now? And try to give them some opportunities to where they're taking part in the decision making for their physical activity, things that they want to do, or we'll
Hmm.
have them vote on the game they want to play as a group. Trying to give them kind of that structured free play. That tends to be a little bit more general in nature, especially when you're dealing with a lot of overhead athletes. Let's
Yeah,
try to do something where we're not throwing an object, or if we are throwing an object, it's a different implement than what you're used to.
yeah,
Watching our volleyball players throw a football is entertaining for everybody. But also, it's impressive to see that then they also get excited when someone's really good
yeah,
at it. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know that you could do that," and that creates some other buy-in from other sports of like, "Oh, I'm really excited that you're here to train." And so we try to, get them to diversify their activity and recognize that like free play, especially in that younger to middle school, like early high school even, is something that's they're probably not getting enough of.
yeah.
And the day of hey, go out and play in the neighborhood and just come back for dinner when the sun goes down is gone for a lot
It's
of reasons
gone.
in the country. So
Yeah,
if we can kind of help influence that in some positive ways, we're definitely going to do it.
yeah. I've had discussions with Lee Taft, and he talks about how like the social component of just free play for kids, it just teaches them so many good life skills like problem solving, man, like having an argument and like being able to
Yeah.
find resolution, and just it's a lost art, and kids don't do that. I mean, think of the back when you were a kid. I know for me, like we would get around like all my neighborhood friends, we would play tackle football or street hockey or wiffle ball or basketball, and like the amount of arguments we got into,
Oh yeah.
but you figure it out,
Yep.
right? And but that's important. Like you need to be able to do this. It's like kids just don't get that in organized play. Like everything's predisposed, and often it's just, yeah, and it just yet another reason why free play is so good and enriching for young athletes, and even like, I mean, as you're saying, like your older high school athletes, like they're getting that too, and then now they're starting to be able to problem solve and all that stuff. Like there's just so much good stuff that comes out of that. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier, we've I can't remember when we started working together through Business for Unicorns. It's got to be over almost a year and a half now.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it'll probably
it
be 2 years
almost 2 years.
upcoming winter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we've had a, prior to this podcast, we've had a good working relationship, and we've had a lot of time talking together. Myself and you and your wife Emily, who you run your business with. One of the things that I respect a lot about you, Ben, is that you seem like you're very intentional about the things you do, both how you represent yourself, your brand, how you coach. Like nothing's by accident, right? And
Mhm.
I respect people who are intentional, and like they do everything with a purpose, right? I live by the motto. It's like how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I see that in our conversations and how you're running your business. I watch it from, the stuff I see on social media with you coaching your athletes. What are some of the things that when you started like this role as a strength coach, maybe it was in pro ball, maybe it was in college, and maybe it's in the private sector now. What were some of the things that we were like, all right, these are my non-negotiables that I want to show up as a coach every day and represent what it is to, train or whatever. Like what are some of the things like core values that you lean on a regular basis that you've kind of built your business around?
Yeah. I think a lot of it really goes back to I was exposed at an early age to great coaches from a quality and value standpoint. Literally, I mean, from youth sports all the way through, specifically with football. I was thinking through actually when we opened our business, Emily and I both talked through like all of our sports experiences and
Hmm.
all of our interactions with coaches from like when we started. And I sat down and I was like, I haven't really thought about this, but every football coach I had from third grade until my senior year of college, I believe was just a great man, like
Hmm.
to a T. They showed up every day for the athlete, and there was a lot of check your ego at the door. I'm here to serve. I'm here to find ways to add value to their situations in life, and I'm invested in more than just the X's and O's. I'm invested in more than just the scoreboard. And a lot of this stuff is cliche.
Hmm.
But I do think, honestly, in the day and age that we live in, that's a really rare thing. And I don't know how many people can say that.
Yeah.
And my wife, it was kind of the opposite a little bit. Like, she actually had a really good experience. She did gymnastics competitively growing up, and she had a
Hmm.
pretty solid experience up until college. And when she got to college, she had a very challenging experience, at the Division I Power 5 level, and ended up actually switching to track, and did pole vault.
Hmm.
Obviously, she is incredibly more talented and more gifted than I am. So you always marry up. But
Love that.
yeah, so but yeah, she felt like the side of achievement and pressure and kind of fear-based model was a lot more prevalent in her college experience. And
Hmm.
um, mine was the exact opposite. I mean, I still talk to my defensive coordinator from college on a pretty regular basis. And still, there's a lot of times in my head I go, what would Matt do? What would Coach McCarty do? What would,
Hmm.
and when we got to kind of our professional careers, early on in my professional career, I felt like I dealt with a lot of people that were a lot more results oriented and fear based and kind of ego driven.
Yeah.
And once I got to the Padres, that kind of shifted a little bit, especially within our strength and conditioning department. I felt like I was a part of a great staff there. But Emily, it was kind of the opposite. Her first mentor in strength and conditioning was, selfless, servant minded,
Yeah.
and definitely process based. So I guess some really big values to kind of take away from all of that we really uphold is like, we are always going to be athlete first.
Hmm.
Our our job would not exist if there were not athletes. And that doesn't matter if you coach at the high school level, the college level, the pro level. Your job does not exist if there are not athletes to coach. Period. That does not mean that the athlete gets whatever they want.
Yeah.
That does not mean that you're going to concede to every demand that comes through the door. Um, but we're going to put athletes first. We're going to remain process driven in how we train and how we treat people. Um, so, we're going to use fundamentally, scientifically based methods that have been proven, and that, I've been doing this for over a decade now. There is that kind of point where you kind of hit of like, I've seen what works. I've seen what doesn't. I've seen a lot of athletes. I've seen who kind of moves like who, and I can kind of recall those things. But
Hmm.
once I recall that thing, am I going to run that back through, proven methodology? And then I think the other thing that I would add to that is we're going to make sure that we're going to look through these things and how we treat people with kindness above all else. And kindness always has an asterisk. Um, Kindness does not mean niceness.
I love that.
Kindness doesn't mean niceness. The people that you love the most in life, you will tell the hardest things to. Um, and the analogy we'll use a lot is, if you had a 4-year-old who was out in the street and there was oncoming traffic, it's your child. You would tackle that child out of the way of the traffic of the oncoming car to make sure that it was okay. Now, when you go to pick that child up, you might have scraped that child's arm. You might have injured them in some way. They're probably going to cry.
Hmm.
They're going to be emotionally distraught from that, but they can't necessarily comprehend. They didn't see the car coming. Um, you know, so that's kindness at times.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean never my goal to make anybody cry. Never my goal to put, someone in a situation where they might be roughed up, but, emotionally, psychologically, socially, like, are we going to tell people the truth
Yeah.
in a way that's going to help them grow in love, or are we going to, shy away and I just don't want to deal with the conflict right now? Because anytime you kick the can of conflict down the road, it just gets bigger, and
Yep.
it will hurt more later. It will
Yeah.
always hurt more later.
Yeah. That's a very mature mindset that, is tough to employ when you're working with kids,
Yeah.
and just people in general, right? Because you mentioned it, like sometimes saying the what an athlete or an individual needs at that time, despite maybe they don't want to hear it, that's being kind, right? Because
Mhm.
if you feel that this is valuable information or something that this person or this athlete can improve upon, or like it's going to help them become a better person, it's like it's almost our calling to help them, right? We got to do it
Yeah.
in a way that they can they're willing to hear it. And that's sometimes and often like the most challenging in the art of coaching and art of mentoring people is that, you gotta, you gotta be able to talk to people and give them this hard information in a way that's spun positively in some aspect. But I like that. So athlete first, sound training principles, and lead with kindness. And again, I think I mentioned off air is like my goal with all of this stuff is really to unpack like what are first principles and how we look at just human performance and just health, longevity, all these things. And the beautiful thing is those three things, if you apply that to anything, there's
Yeah.
going to be value, right? It just doesn't have to be coaching.
Hmm.
It could be in any position as a parent, as a coach. There's a lot of value to unpack there. I love that. Outside of those three things, is there anything that, like, I know you and Emily, a lot of the things that you've done, and I've looked into we've talked, and I love your social media stuff. Like, you talk a lot about like the faith, how like a lot of that stuff leads you and the decisions you make. Like, maybe talk to a little bit about that and how like that's kind of also been part of the way you've shaped your outlook on a lot of those things.
Yeah, I think the Bible verse that we have like on our wall is 1 Kings 19 through 21, and it's not a coffee cup verse. It's not a lot of people know John 3:16. A lot of people know um, Romans 8:28 or some other obvious ones, but this one it's actually a story of Elijah. He's an Old Testament character, and he's done being his time is coming to an end of being the prophet of Israel, kind of the mouthpiece of God to God's people, and God calls him to anoint the next prophet, and that character's name is Elisha. Like classic Bible, you have to have
Hmm.
the names confusing. Um, but so Elisha is a farmer and he's plowing in a field with a team of oxen. And Elijah comes up to him and puts his cloak around him to signify, like, you're going to be the next prophet. And Elisha says, "Can I say goodbye to my family first?" And Elijah says, "Yeah, that's fine." So he unhooks his oxen, he breaks up his farming plow, he sacrifices a few of the oxen, and then he takes the rest of them and he basically has a backyard barbecue for the village and his family, and then he says goodbye. And he, when he does this, it's like, in today's terms, it's like, well, what's the significance of this? I grew up in the Midwest, grew up in agricultural environment, and the equivalent of that today would be like if someone torched a $500,000 combine and their tractors and their implement, and
Hmm.
decided to go like into ministry, go overseas, whatever capacity that might be that God's calling you to. And um, he, Elisha was all in. He was all. I can't go back to my old life. There's not another option. This is what I have to do. When I got out of professional baseball, it was kind of like a tipping point. It was the first year after COVID. We had just kind of had a lot of staff change within our own department, and there was a lot of kind of miscommunication in different directions. And ultimately, what ended up happening was out of our 12 strength coaches on staff, 10 left. And
Wow.
yeah, and I was a part of that.
Hmm.
So it was one of those, like, I really didn't know what was next. I had somebody reach out to me about potentially opening a facility in Northwest Arkansas. I'd lived here before. My wife was currently living here. We were engaged, or we were dating at the time. We weren't even engaged.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I probably going to propose. Should probably not be in a hotel 180 days a year if we're going to be
Yeah.
married. So what's this going to look like? And came down here to kind of shake this whole situation out and see it through, to see if we could open a facility with some other partners. And ultimately all that fell through, and during that time there was a couple of pro ball opportunities that came up that I decided not to apply to, because I really believe that, like, I want to see this through first
Yeah.
before I move on to the next. And in the process of all this falling through, I actually had one opportunity with the White Sox come up, and started kind of going down that rabbit hole, and through some like unexplainable, very much unexplainable things, like ended up not um, having that position offered to me. And um, it was also one of those that I was praying during that time, like, God, if you want me to do this, make it obvious. But if you don't want me to do
Yeah.
this, then no. Like, I want to be faithful to what you. A lot of times, I think that you can be faithful in your walk with God by making. You can make two different decisions, and either way you can be faithful. But
Hmm.
sometimes I do think God's like, no, this is the thing. This is exactly what I want you to do. And so I try to be sensitive to that. And yeah, I mean, he closed that door pretty obviously. And that happened. And then, like, about a week and a half later, an opportunity came to lease a building on our own, my wife and I alone, um, that basically provided a way where we could open a business debt free.
Hmm.
And it was one of those like, okay, well, God, if you provided this opportunity and this is what you want me to do, like Elijah getting that um, cloak put around him, like, I have to be all in.
Yeah.
We have to. There's not another option here. So, um, yeah, we from that moment on, it's like this is what it has to be. We have to be all in on this. And at that point, like pretty much everything that I had saved up, like it cost us all of that. It cost us all of that to open.
Yeah.
Um, Now we could do it debt free, but it was like to the dollar, and then we hustled for 6 months, both working other jobs outside the gym. My wife was helping manage a CrossFit gym. I was doing like some property management, repair, handyman stuff on the side, and like
Hmm.
landscaping in the Arkansas summer. So that was really fun and exhausting, but it was like, no, this is what we're supposed to do. It's very
Yeah.
clear that this is what we're supposed to do. So we're going to be faithful to what God's called us to. And then we kind of hit a point of like, we're breaking. I don't know if we can keep doing this, like burning it on both ends. We did some math on like, well, how many people would we need to train to be able to pay ourselves enough to continue? And in 6 weeks time, we had enough. And, and it was like to the dollar. This is exactly what you need. Here it is. Let's
Yeah.
roll. And that's not meant to be like like a prosperity gospel, like, things are always going to work out rosy, because it all could have fallen through. And
Hmm.
you know God still is who he is. And our mission as coaches, I think, it stays the same. I think that every great performance coach kind of takes an unofficial, like, strength and conditioning Hippocratic oath of like, if I'm going to do this job, I'm going to show up, and whatever athlete is in front of me deserves all of my help
Yeah.
for that time. And if I'm not going to do that, then this probably isn't for me.
Yeah.
And to also just see God's grace and goodness of providing a way. It's like we can't help but want to do that every day. And it's really helpful. Like, we have a mural of that on our wall of the
Yeah.
First Kings 19. It's like you see it every day. It's like, this is why we're
Yeah.
here. This is why we're here. It's not about us.
Yeah. Well, I love that story because it was almost like you gave yourself no other option, and you had said like maybe it wouldn't have worked, but that being said, given the mindset you took, right? Like in today's modern era, it's like, I guess it's the term like burning the boats. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you left no option for anything else to work. And so a good friend of mine, Andy McCloy, he says when he opened his business, option B was to make option A work, right? Like there was
Yeah.
no second contingency plan. It was how do we, what do we need to do to make this work? And that's it. Like there's no other options. And so the thing that I loved there was that the way you did that was one athlete at a time, serving the athlete in front of you. And to me, like some of the best strength coaches, the people who've had the most success, like that's the mentality they've taken,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it's become, how do I take that and scale that, right? How do
Yeah.
I, and that's similar to what I did with my business. Is like I was so focused from day one about creating the best possible training experience for the athlete or the individual in front of me. And then it got to be to the point where, and I know you're up to this, it's like you only have so much time and bandwidth, so like that's kind of you've hit your ceiling. So now how do I bring in coaches and coach them and get them up to the standards and teach them everything I know, so that now they can also approach this as I do, and they start to build my brand and all, and so on and so forth. And so now you can create that same high level experience and positive experience for young athletes at scale, right?
Yes.
And so that's kind of at least what I see as the goal of most strength coaches, whether or not they can get to that next level of teaching other coaches and mentoring other coaches, much like they've mentored their athletes. That tends to be, I know for me, that was a hard thing. And the coaches I work with and talk to and gym owners I talk to, like that seems to be a challenging part, right? But once they figure out that leverage point, it becomes a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then it's just a matter of like, can you allow yourself to step back from that role that you've so long, executed on, right? Like being that head coach, being the person who's running everything, and like you just fall into that routine and that identity, and it becomes tough to let go of that. But it's
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely been. I mean, we've added some new coaches in this last year, and I love coaching. And we had a staff meeting the other day about some things that we want to roll out this fall. We are kind of like assigning projects, and as I was going through it, I was like, wait, if he does this, that means I don't do it.
hmm
Which I'm pressed for time, so I get, but I love doing that.
yeah.
So, but it's a good thing, We still, since we've added staff, I've really tried to keep a conversational style of leadership of provide instead of necessarily telling people what to do, asking them how they want to do it, and
Awesome.
yeah, and that has definitely helped in like I'll still be in on some conversations, but ultimately I'm not the one writing it in stone and pulling the trigger. I think Emily and I are pretty fortunate to we had a lot of hurdles to jump over in hiring coaches, and we've been through
hmm
several. I think we talked through this of like I thought we
Yeah.
had somebody, we didn't for a handful of months and years, and um, we finally gotten to where we went through all that to really vet to where I think we have some great assistants now that are going to add a ton of value to where they're not going to do anything crazy that I'm going to have any negative thoughts towards to where I'm not too worried. Um, but it is the aspect of like actually my job's to serve my coaches now so
Yes.
they can serve the athletes, and that doesn't mean I still don't get to be on the floor and still have fun. Especially youth and high school kids are great, man. I think that if anybody out there is thought maybe they don't want to do that long term, work with youth in high school. If you can't coach just because you can coach a college athlete doesn't mean you can coach a fifth grader. Fifth
hmm
grader is actually way harder, but will grow you so much more as a coach in a lot of ways. And just being on the floor for the dumb things they say, and just it's definitely worth it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I can definitely empathize with that. I mean, I'm 42 now. When I started the Annex, I was 25, 24, 25. And so like the age gap wasn't that big. Now it's gigantic. And
yeah,
so like I kind of utilize some of the conversations I have because I have my daughters are almost teenagers. And so I'm like, how do I talk to them? And like, what are the things that they're interested in? How do I make connections there? And so it certainly is, it's a fun thing. It keeps you young,
yes,
right?
yeah,
It just, it's hard not to love it, right? It's challenging in a lot of ways too, but it's hard not to love it. And it's tough to walk away because I know for me, for so many years, like, I found purpose through like serving athletes, right?
yeah,
That's what filled me up, right? Like what got me out of my dark days of transitioning out of being an athlete was coaching. And it was a cathartic and just unbelievable experience for me. And I enjoyed it so much. So to kind of walk away from that, it's like, all right, well, now where am I getting my purpose? Like what else is filling my cup up, so to speak? And you mentioned it, right? Like I say, like, for many many years I poured everything into my athletes, right?
mhm,
The athlete and the client in front of me. Now it's, how do I do that for my coaches? How do I create opportunity? Like I wanted to create opportunities for my athletes to play at the next level.
mhm,
How do I create opportunities for my team? Right.
yeah,
I was very fortunate. I've been able to make a career in this field. It's very hard to do that,
yeah,
especially if you're not an owner, right?
mhm,
So how do I do that? How do I create a place where coaches want to work and create an atmosphere where they can get better at coaching, two, that they can earn a good living, right?
yeah,
And have a career, and not just like all right, I'm going to do this until something else comes up,
yeah,
which is pretty commonplace in our field, which is why it's so hard to find good people and keep good people. So,
yeah. No, the one of the things that I think I've enjoyed the most just in the few months that we've had a bigger staff is knowing that we're providing an opportunity.
hmm
The my first year and a half, um, it was either unpaid or a very low college stipend, and then the second year and a half was a low college stipend before I finally got the full time paycheck. And the time you put in, the hours you put in, you're working. I mean, this job is at the college and pro level is 60 hours a week minimum,
hmm
and um, to know that like actually we're kind of providing an opportunity that's helping people that have put in a little bit of that earn something better. I think that we're able to kind of better the field
Yeah.
and provide something to where we can give our field a little bit more of a future. Because I mean, parents tell us this all the time that I need you to tell my kid this because they'll listen to you. you know and
Yeah.
so without a doubt, we all know that teachers and coaches have a huge impact on kids.
Yeah.
If we get to provide a really good opportunity for a coach to actually like have a life that they can support and also provide a little bit more work-life balance than you know they maybe would have had in college or the professional setting. So then they're in a better place,
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally, psychologically, that they can help more.
Absolutely.
It's like it's just a compound effect
Yeah.
of positivity that we get to provide.
Yeah. I mean, that's in our roles as like leaders, right? Like as business owners and from a leadership standpoint, like that's how we make the profession better, right? Like
Yep.
you said it. How do we make the training experience better for our athletes? Well, create opportunity for our coaches so that, like if you don't spend enough time in this field, like you've been doing it, you said over a decade, I've almost 2 decades in, it's like the amount of things I've learned just because I'm in it. And
Yep.
I mean, you say 10,000, I've probably put in 50,000 hours into this, and so
Mhm.
like that knowledge is what's going to help progress this field forward, right?
Mhm.
If we're not creating opportunity for kids and to find a career and want to pursue more knowledge growth and more opportunities through research or whatever, like we're limiting the long term and longevity of our career, right? And so it becomes where like the we're the people who are kind of the gatekeepers to that. If we can create good opportunities, people are going to want to stay around and push the progress of the field forward. So
Absolutely.
um, yeah, and I don't like I think when I started my business, like there were only a few options, right? In this world of strength and conditioning, like you could work for collegiate sports, you could work in professional sports, and if you were brave enough, you could open up your own own facility, or like you work at like a big box gym,
Yep.
right? What we provide didn't really exist back then,
Mhm.
and so um, I've certainly been on like the forefront of how we're progressing it. But um, and you're somebody who's had I never worked outside of the private sector. I was always in the private sector, and so you're somebody who's unique to talk about like the nuance between each experience from college to pro to private sector. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you are like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in the, let's call it, scholastic and or professional sector that you're not necessarily dealing with on a day to day now?
Yeah, I would say, the college world, there's a lot of hands um, on the athletes, but they tend to get pulled in one direction more than the other.
Hmm.
One of the things that I actually thought that we did well when I was in pro ball was that I felt like our health department, so our sports med, our athletic trainers, our physical therapists, strength coaches, I thought we did a really good job of kind of like having a circle of we're all, at different places in the circle, but the center of the circle is the athlete. And we want to keep the athlete in the middle to where we're
Hmm.
all helping and the athlete is hearing the same messaging and the same voice. Um, and it felt like when I was in the college side of things, and this is very dependent upon each college
Location.
you're
Yeah.
at, yeah,
Yeah.
each department and each team. Each team has a different sport coach, but in the college world, the sport coach ultimately seems to have the final say in a lot of things,
Hmm.
even to the point where it's like, hey, I want, like, comes into the strength coach and says, I want you to train them this way. Like, I want you to make my track throwers Olympic lift, period. Like, no matter what you believe and what you think and your experience in seeing human adaptation, that does not matter. We
Yeah.
have to do this. Or, some of the a really popular thing when I was in college was the Omaha Challenge. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can do some things that are mentally building like physical mental toughness and resilience. That's a whole nother conversation of toughness is task and skill specific. Just because you're tough at exercise doesn't mean you're going to be tough in a 3-2
Yeah.
count trying to get to the conference championship. Like, that's
Yeah.
different. But you get in those situations where you have a sport coach that has something, that a hill that they want to die on, and if that
Hmm.
conflicts with your overall training methodology and values, you run into some issues. And I had, for the most part, I was at a Division II in South Dakota. For the most part, I had a really good relationship with the baseball staff there and the track staff there, but there were some other teams that I kind of butted some heads with in some of those thought processes. And ultimately, it all kind of boiled back down to like, what do you value?
Hmm.
Are we putting the athlete first, or are we putting our own ego and like what we
Yeah.
think is going to work? Do you want to be the reason why your athlete succeeds, or do you want the athlete to be the reason why they succeed?
Yeah.
I think if you have the servant mindset, then you're going to come at it like, hey, I just provided an opportunity.
Hmm.
I try to keep that mindset here of like, if an athlete ever really thanks me big time, I'm like, hey, like, you're welcome, but understand, like, you did the hard part.
Yeah.
Like, I provided the easy part, you did the
Yeah.
hard part. So I think that that's a big one. Is like, I'm now. Are there sport coaches and stuff outside of here that our kids interact with? Yes, but ultimately, the the contact hours are less, and their bandwidth that we're able to provide them of a little bit more general physical activity can kind of offset some of those things, and the parents get to play a lot bigger role at that
Yeah.
level, than they do at the college level. So sometimes there's people that are just making decisions that don't necessarily have the best education and experience to make them. Um, but I would say ultimately in college, I had a pretty good situation with all those things. I'd say, at the professional level, there's actually a lot more pros. I thought pros than
Hmm.
cons in professional
Yeah.
baseball compared to college, with like contact hours, and also like everybody's there for baseball. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more high level experience. There's a lot more people that are thinking. Um, they have to be a little bit more athlete centric, period. But when you start to kind of mix in things with the front office and money and trades and
Yeah.
contracts and all those things do get a little bit more messy there. And that's also one of those, like, it is a business,
Hmm.
and so when you're coaching, when I first got into the pro side of things, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about coaching. I wasn't thinking about
Yeah.
money. I wasn't thinking about, like, we gotta trade this guy for this guy, or we gotta send this guy up because of this, or we gotta send this guy down because of those. Weren't things that I was even comprehending. They weren't in my realm of thought at all. So when I got there, I was like, this seems a little messed up at times.
Hmm.
But I'm not the one that had to make those decisions. So ultimately, with our model now, it's like, hey, if you commit to training with us, our job is to help you athletically, period. To help you
Yeah.
create a general robustness for athletic development and to grow you into adulthood the best that we can to be a morally sound individual. That's it. There's no contract like negotiation and trade. There's no sport coach that's going to come in here and tell me exactly this is what we're going to do. So
Yeah.
those two barriers are gone. There are their own challenges in this side, but ultimately, like, after doing it for 3 years and some change, like, I think we're really happy with where we're at, and I think that our realm of impact is as big as it's ever been, and how we can really, like, help shape and mold and grow athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like everybody I've spoken to who has spent time in team sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
They on both sides of the coin, they see all the positives to how and when a team works together from a support staff standpoint, and how positively that impacts the athlete. But then there's also experiences where maybe it's not as positive an experience, and people don't often collaborate, or you know again, you mentioned, like, do you want to be responsible for this, and so on and so forth. Then it just becomes a lot of egos and dealing with people's expectations and bias and stuff like that. So there's definitely challenge from that standpoint. But again, when it goes well, it's great.
Yeah,
It's wonderful to be around. And especially, I'm sure, the pro sport level, it's like everybody's there for the common goal. And when it's a good team environment, like any good team environment, like
mm-hmm.
it's a fun place to be. And
Mm-hmm.
it just goes to show you how important culture is from a leadership and execution standpoint.
Absolutely, yeah.
um Now, you had mentioned, how there were challenges transitioning from that world to the private sector. What might have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced early on, maybe in making that transition outside of business alone, right? Like, as a true coach, like, what were some of the things that you're like, all right, these are things and ways I operated in team sport for a long time. I kind of have to change the way I do things when I'm dealing with younger athletes in the private sector.
Yeah, I think just the age difference in communication was a thing initially. There's you kind of hit this point with that, like, middle school through early high school. There's the window of when you bring somebody in for the first time and you're talking with them. Sometimes you run into a situation where the parent does all the talking for the kid,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you're trying to build a relationship and communicate with the kid, and you understand, like, is this kid mature enough to communicate on their own?
Mm-hmm.
Are there things that the parent is maybe saying that as the kid gets older, maybe the perspective is a little skewed? So I think navigating that initially was, I wouldn't say that it ever went bad, but it was definitely a learning curve of learning how to communicate to kids who aren't necessarily used to speaking for themselves,
Yeah.
and learning how to ask questions in a way that allows them to feel comfortable to open up and talk. And also, like, I'm getting older. Like, we started doing this when I was 30, and
Yeah.
working with a kid who's 20 years younger than you is
Yeah.
a
It's
thing.
tough.
Yeah,
It's
it's a thing.
yeah.
That's actually one thing I'm really excited is, we made a couple of these hires, and we've got a guy who's in his younger 20s, and it's super effective that he knows all the lingo and
Mm-hmm.
super relatable. So that was a little bit of a thing. I mean, you'd mentioned obviously the business side of things was a whole
Yeah.
loop, but it wasn't. I mean, I think we made that transition pretty well too. We had a lot of wisdom to lean on
Yeah.
initially with people that were small business owners that we had previously known, some in the industry and some not.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super helpful. And then I would also say, like, being in professional baseball, you have to be really flexible with programming, just with guys moving up and down and training ages, and especially as you start to get to higher levels of pro baseball, they start having, your athletes start having kids and they don't sleep very well. There's so many different things
Yeah.
that you have to fluctuate. And I felt like I was pretty good at that, but I didn't think that was going to be as much of a thing as it is
Yeah.
training youth and high school athletes with, inconsistency of schedule at times, and the workload that they have outside being very unpredictable at time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I I think we were able to be really flexible, and we've done a good job of that. But I think going into it, I wasn't ready. Like, I didn't think that was going to be much of a thing as it was.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because I would definitely say when I early on in my coaching career, there wasn't as much noise outside of just training, right? Like
Yeah.
kids weren't playing as frequently as as they are now. So I felt like I had way more bandwidth with athletes, and the conversation of like doing less, kind of like what we talked about earlier, is wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's almost like you're treating high school amateur athletes who are not fully developed, and almost like managing them like you are like, your pro athletes,
Yep.
right? But they're 6, 7, 8 years younger, and it's like, well, you're not even through puberty yet, and you're already like, you're overworked and overtired every time you come in, and how are we going to get anything done productively if you don't have anything left in the tank when you come into the training facility?
Mm-hmm.
and and to me, getting back to the whole long-term athletic development thing, is like, if we can get these athletes and families too, because parents are part of the challenge when they over program their athletes, and it's like, here's kind of where the sweet spot is. We understand we want to go and play, and we want to go and compete and do all these things, but let's try to say, like, all right, maybe certain parts of the year we're more heavily leaning on training
Mm-hmm.
versus competing, and then in some parts, like, we'll fully concede, like, you're going to be more heavily leaning and competing and less on training. That's the evolution and the ebb and the flow of the year, and it just becomes, getting back to your point about communicating with the athlete, it's also about now also having to figure out ways of not only communicating with the athlete, but with their parents as well, in some
Yeah.
fashion, right? um, and when do you kind of like lean on the athlete to say, like, you need to start taking ownership of this, you're getting old enough, like, if you want to keep playing and moving up and competing, and so you got to start to learn how to do these things. And so that, to me, outside of just the X's and O's of training is like how I think that's where I think we do a really good job of developing athletes. Is like we're giving them the wisdom of how to carry themselves and manage all of these things because that's what it's like now,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that we say on the first day that our kids probably get tired of me saying is the number one asset that you have to your athletic potential is your body.
Yep.
And it's yours. So you need to know it and you need to be able to manage it better than anything else in life. And that goes, I mean, because everything, like you said earlier, everything is stress. So
Hmm.
being able to get them to take ownership of talking about it and communicating about it, and also being able to talk to their parents, um, and making sure that that conversation is flowing well. And that is, I will say that is a challenge of like, you know, my wife and I will sometimes say like stepping into this role, you are unofficially accepting the responsibility to help parent kids. Like
Hmm.
you are. I mean, in some capacities, you are. In
Absolutely.
any sort of kid level thing, you are. But you have to be careful not to parent the parents,
Yeah.
and you have to understand how to um, provide, recommendation, um, by, helping them make decisions without telling them to make decisions.
Hmm.
And that is an art. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that we've been able to, I think one of the most helpful things we kind of talked about early about like, you know, honesty and kindness, not niceness. I think, right out of the gate, whenever we have somebody come in for their first day and the parents come with them, it's like we talk through like,
Yeah.
this is how we view long-term athletic development. This is how we view these things. This is how we comprehend like how people are going to develop, and this is why it makes sense. So just understand that before we start. So that way, if you have those conversations early, then you can come at it from like, do you remember when? Um, it's kind of like that one time when we already talked about, and it's
Hmm.
not a foreign language to them because especially when it comes to kids, I think parents can be, um, if something comes out of left field at them, they can be more defensive and reactive immediately. So it's really important to kind of lay that foundational conversation early, and to touch it occasionally over
Yeah.
time to make sure that it continues to be positive. So something does come up. We've actually had a couple of overuse injuries this last summer, and it was, yeah, I mean, mismanagement of load. But
Hmm.
all of our interactions with our parents with all of it was great, like fantastic.
Yeah.
We've been fortunate to have great parents. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that just again, it speaks to your core value of serving the athlete in front of you. Like when you go into these relationships and these conversations with the purpose of serving and not getting anything out of it, no expectation, like I'm just here to serve you, like people see that. And to me, from my outside looking into, your experience, that's one of the things that I see that you've really done a great job of, and it's allowed you to create a framework of success. Both when you first started your business to now, and then wherever your business goes from here. That those core values that people lean on in terms of how they approach every decision making process, how every conversation. That's what creates continuity, right? And in order to continue to grow and scale and do things at a higher level, like there needs to be consistency with what we do. And they always say like it's not the day-to-day stuff. It's like what are the behaviors that you're creating in order to become the person you want to become.
Hmm.
And behavior is driven by first principles. And
Hmm.
like I said earlier on, like that's one thing I respect about you and Emily. Like you guys do an awesome job of doing that. And it speaks both in the quality of the business you've created and like the quality of the athletes that you're producing. So I love that.
We appreciate it. Yeah. And we've appreciated all of your wisdom and guidance along the way. You've heard us kind of have our brief moments of freak out of,
Oh yeah.
are we doing these things right? I don't know. I made this decision. Was it the right one? And having, equally a principle guided person as a sounding board to just provide clarity and direction is always been greatly appreciated.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's anybody who has been in my role now is like they've all been through all of those things, right? Like there's it's the natural evolution in the seasons of owning a gym. And I appreciate what you guys are doing. So given all that, like, what is next for the future of Resolute? What's in the works for the future?
Yeah, well, personally, I guess Emily and I are, we are expecting our first child. So we're really excited about that. We're about 9 weeks away. It's due mid October. So, um, yeah, that's going to be a whole nother adventure all of its own.
Hmm.
And that's definitely going to change, our ability to execute the same way that we've always executed. Emily's already started to kind of step back a little bit from the coaching floor.
Hmm.
And, we've been able to add um, some staff since then. And this last summer, they've all grown a ton. So we're kind of in
That's great.
a good grooving position there. And we're also, looking forward to, kind of expanding our college and pro training as our kids, continue to improve and play at the next level. We've had a lot of
Hmm.
kids that have had a lot of opportunity between, going and playing college and then also some opportunities in professional sports too. So um, it's just kind of one of those like my uncle, another kind of mentor to me. He has this thing that he says he just calls it the journey continues. It's like no matter what good happens, no matter what bad happens, once you've kind of like come to terms with where you're at, the journey continues. So it's kind of like
Love that.
could have had the worst day ever, could have had the best day ever. The sun's going to come up tomorrow, and you're just going to keep
Yeah.
going forward. So we're really blessed to have had like a lot of growth, especially this year as a business, and also in our family as well. So it's kind of one of those where we feel like we're riding high in a lot of
Hmm.
ways, and we're kind of almost like, okay, is something
Yeah.
gonna happen. Not to wish negativity or ill upon us, but um, yeah, I think we've gone through a lot of things in the last year, and we're really excited about kind of where we're at, and then also appropriately braced for whatever may lay ahead. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Any growing business has points of friction, and it's often, when you address those things is when you start to see on the backside of those, that often it's like a knowledge gap, or it's you becoming a person that is capable of managing those types of challenges. Like, it's often, once you built break through that friction is when you start to see growth again. And it's almost like you need that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you hit a ceiling, and then you figure out how to break through the ceiling, and then you see more growth, and then you hit another ceiling. And that's just how the evolution of a business goes. Obviously in my experience, it's been that way. And in every situation, it's like, well, what do I need to get better at? Like, how do I need to change? What behaviors and daily actions do I need to get better at in order to, you know, to take our business to the next level? Because at the end of the day, like, that's what the business needs. Like, I need to to attack each challenge and be the person who's managing all these things. And sometimes it's like stepping away and not coaching and giving somebody else that opportunity, because that's what the business needs. And
Mm-hmm.
it's tough, but I'm confident you guys are continue to move in the right direction, and you understand the what's most important when running these types of businesses. And I respect the heck out of you guys. So
Thanks, Mickey. Yeah, and
yeah.
likewise, I'm excited to see how your guys' fall and winter training shapes up too. So
Yeah. For those, Ben, who want to reach out to you or see what you guys are doing, where can they find you?
yeah, so our email for our business is resolutenwa@gmail.com. And then our Instagram is also resolute.nwa. And then my personal Instagram is Loftis Strong, LOFTISTRONG. So,
Love it.
yep.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Ben. Means a lot that in especially a busy day today, like taking the time out to chat. So I really appreciate it.
Likewise, thanks, Mickey.